Hello again. Thanks to your pastors for being so wonderful about sharing the podium with old retired pastors like myself, because if they didn't, I'd have no place to go. So thank you, thank you. A couple observations. I was noticing on the pictures of the camp, upcoming camp, you notice that one of the marshmallows was kind of burnt. That's my favorite. We used to call them koge. Yeah. I used to love that. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. And anyway, so Pastor Rebecca began a short sermon series last week that's entitled Open the Door, which also happens to be the word or the phrase of the year for Wellspring, which I'm very thankful for. And I've been pondering this entire week a question that Pastor Rebecca asked at the conclusion of her message last week. What door within me needs to be open so Christ can be more fully present? What door within me needs to be open so Christ can be more fully present? Some of you might remember that I was a chaplain at Kuokini Hospital for a few years, and it was Chaplain Nathan Kohashi who encouraged me to look into becoming a chaplain. So I'm eternally grateful to Chaplain Nathan for that. He was, at that time, the chaplain at Straub while I was at Kuokini, and so we shared time together. You know, as chaplains, we were taught to always knock at the door, whether it was open or closed, before we went into a patient's room. And I remember it was probably the first week at the hospital when I came upon an open door, and I knocked softly, but I saw an older woman inside, an older patient. And I introduced myself and I said, I'm the chaplain. As soon as the word chaplain came out of my mouth, she yelled from her bed, "Am I dying? Are you here to tell me that I'm dying?" I didn't realize I'd had that kind of effect on people. I guess she associated chaplains with bad news. I guess you never know who comes knocking at your door, and you aren't always able to tell what's on the other side of the door and whether the news is good or bad coming on the other side. This morning's message is entitled Doorways to Discovery, and our passage comes from Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, and this is a story that I'm sure is very familiar to you. Now, as they went on their way, meaning Jesus and his disciples, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. And she had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. And so she came to him, meaning Jesus, and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing, and Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." I really love this story, and I always have. But I am guilty, as so many others, in having cast Martha in a dismissive light. We often see Mary as the champion of faith. And we see Martha as an example of having the work part down, but not the faith part down. And in doing so, we think less of Martha than we really ought to. But as James reminds us in chapter 2, so faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. And in verse 26 we read, "For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is also dead." Faith and works, we need them. Martha and Mary, we need both of them. It struck me as I read this passage that it was actually Martha, along with her husband, who owned the home. And as the woman of the house, Martha, It was Martha's responsibility to take care of her guests. And she was the one likely to have actually invited Jesus into their home. And by serving Jesus, she was doing what was expected of her. And so in her own tradition, Martha was actually acting with faith and in faith. Jesus isn't criticizing Martha then for serving. However, Jesus can see something stirring inside of Martha's heart. And he says to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. That Jesus repeated her name, Martha, Martha, is an indication of affection and tenderness. It is not criticalness. It's not rebuke, but it's actually love. He isn't scolding her for being a busy host. He is expressing concern for what he sees inside her spirit. What is she distracted by anyway? Here's what I think. She wants to be sure that everything is just right. The chicken katsu that she's made has to be onolicious. She wants to be sure that everything is exquisite and presentable. But something is bothering her, and we read in verse 40, when Martha comes to Jesus and she says, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me. I think we've all been there, right? She's resentful. Here she is busy preparing and busy serving. And where is Martha? Mary? Martha is upset because she feels like she's alone in her service and in her work. And she wants Mary to fulfill her role as co-host of the event. You know, sadly, when we open this door of comparison, when we believe that we are the ones following the rules, we are the ones doing all the right things, working so hard that other people come in on our coattails, unfortunately, our hearts may sometimes be filled with resentment and with bitterness. Now, here's a bit of irony for Martha. I believe that Martha actually had the gift of hospitality. I think she had the gift of hospitality. Have you ever been in the presence or in the home of someone with the gift of hospitality? You feel like you're the most important person in the room. That's how a person with hospitality makes you feel. Unfortunately for Martha, in a momentary lapse into resentment, Martha actually turned her gift of hospitality on its head, and she even made it uncomfortable for her honored guest, Jesus, by asking him to demand that Mary get busy. Her gift of hospitality went out the adobe window. Her strength turned into ash, and it caused her temporary blindness. Resentment caused her to lose the joy she normally would have had in utilizing her gift. Let me say that again. Resentment caused her to lose the joy she normally would have in utilizing her gift. And her resentment prevented her from seeing the gift that Mary was unwrapping in front of her. The gift of being present in the presence of God. So when we hold bitterness and resentment in our hearts toward other people, we may be turning God-given gifts into burdens. We also become blind to the gifts in others, and we lose the ability to encourage what is good in them. You know, I love basketball. I always have. And I played till I was about 63 years old, which to me is quite an accomplishment. And I was happy to play pickup ball all the time, and with my son too, Ben, who's a fantastic basketball player. And in fact, way back when we started Wellspring, I used to go and play basketball in Kahala with Han Kwek. Han's not here this morning, but you know, Han and his friends, they were like in their 20s at the time. And my misshapen nose is because I accidentally ran into one of his friend's elbows. Yeah. So I still have this misshapen nose, and I'm proud to have it. But recently I was talking to a high school friend about a basketball league that we were involved in. It was sponsored by the YMCA, the Nuuanu YMCA. So we played for the championship in my senior year of this YMCA league. And you know what? We won. But then the YMCA director came to us and informed us that the other club team had filed a protest. Apparently, one of our guys was wearing swimming trunks instead of gym trunks. I didn't realize there was a difference, but you know there's a difference? And in fact, that friend of mine played maybe 2 minutes of the game. But because they wanted to win, they filed a protest. And so we played another game. And what happened? Guess. No, we lost. And so we were so upset. So we went to the YMCA director and we said, you got to let us play a third game, winner take all. Sounds fair, right? They said no. We were denied. And so we lost the championship. I tell you what, I still remember that day. And I was talking to my high school friend about it. We were reminiscing about it. And he smiled and he said, hey, bro, you got to let him go. You know, the fact that 56 years have passed and I can still remember that. And I can still remember what I felt. The pain and the resentment. And it tells me that I haven't dealt with it adequately. And you know what? I have often wondered if that's the reason when one of my favorite teams, like the Golden State Warriors, when they win championships, one of the first places my brain goes to is, gee, what would it have been like if with 56-year girls we had won the championship ourselves? It's ridiculous, isn't it? It reveals to me that there may be other events or other people that I'm still holding resentment and bitterness toward. And I can actually name them. I won't in front of you, but... So I've chosen a word or a phrase of the year every year since 2001, when Pastor Dale and Pastor Randy introduced that idea to us when we started Wellspring. This past year, having to undergo chemotherapy for lymphoma, the word that pursued me was courage. Courage, that was my word of the year last year. For 2026, it's been taking a while, but it began brewing in me when I had that conversation with my high school buddy. And it truly captured me over this past week as I was preparing this message. And with some inspiration from the very famed theologian and pop icon, Princess Elsa of Frozen, my phrase of the year is, let it go, let it go. That's my phrase for the year. Because there's a lot of things I have to let go of. How about you? How about you? Is there a door that you need to open to God where Christ can be more fully present with you? And does that door lead to your bitterness and your resentments and grudges too? Could that be a door that you need to open? Interestingly enough, I read a little booklet many, many years ago by one of my favorite seminary professors, Robert Munger, called My Heart, Christ Home, where he likens our life to different rooms in our life. Like, for example, the library is what we put into our minds. The kitchen is our appetites, you know, all the things that we want to consume. And there's a room that he calls the hallway closet. And he describes it as a room that stinks But we don't want to open that particular room to Jesus. We want to keep it hidden away. It's a secret room. But Jesus asked the owner of the home, won't you open that door to me? Are there some secret rooms in your life where you're carrying things that you don't want other people to know about that Jesus really needs to help you with? Maybe it is that hallway closet that leads to your bitterness and grudges and your resentments. Believe me when I say this, it's best if you can let it go. Let it go. And what can we learn from Mary? We read in verse 39, Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. And in verse 32 we read, there is need of only one thing, and Mary has chosen the better part, and it will be not taken away from her. We can sort of picture what's happening in the house that day. There's some hustle and bustle as Martha and some of her servants are running around and setting up the table, making guests feel comfortable. But there, in the middle of it all, a more serene scene appears. It's Mary. She's sitting quietly at the feet of Jesus, listening to him. Nothing out of the ordinary, it would seem, but what's taking place with Mary is actually transformative and is boundary shifting. Another door is being opened by Mary's quiet act of obedience and bravery. Remembering that this was a very patriarchal society, only men were actually allowed to sit at the feet of teachers and rabbis, never women. Men were considered the students and the disciples, never women. But Jesus, rather than chastising Mary for a breach of decorum, affirms her presence, and he commends her for her actions. Mary was actually quietly breaking down centuries-long traditions and boundaries. And the beauty of Mary's posture before Jesus is that she has opened a new door not only for herself, but for everyone who has ever been on the margins, that they may encounter God as well. Women, children, and servants, back in that day, they all had to rely on the man of the house for their spiritual nurture and spiritual growth. But Mary is showing another way to engage the presence of God. And that too is a door that we might want to open. The door to encountering God in ways that we have never experienced before. The door to encountering God in ways we've not experienced before. I went to a Christian college for my sophomore year on the mainland. And to attend this college, all of us students had to sign a code of conduct. I believe they call it a community covenant today, in which we would promise several things: to attend chapel 3 times a week, to not drink alcohol, to not smoke, and not dance. I had kind of a difficult time with some of it. But in the spring of that year, our drama department put on this great musical play, Fiddler on the Roof. Do you remember that? It's a story about Tevye the milkman. It's a story of a Jewish family. Tevye the milkman, his wife Golda, and their 3 daughters, right? And you remember the wonderful song from that play. If I were a rich man, yabba-dabba-dabba-dabba-dabba-dee-ba-dum. So there's a scene in this play. It's a wedding reception. The men are on one side of a rope, the women are on the other side of the rope. And in this scene, Perchik, who's a young Russian man who's in love with one of Tevye's daughters, the youngest daughter, Hodel. He crosses over the rope. And the audience that I was with that evening, you could hear an audible gasp when he did that. And then when he reaches for the hand of Huddle, and she takes his hand and stands, and they begin to dance, our audience, made up mostly of students, stood up and cheered wildly and applauded wildly. And you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of this scene from Braveheart, another movie. At the end of the movie where Braveheart yells, "Freedom! Freedom!" It was as though all of us in that auditorium watching this play were being given permission to be free and to explore new ways to deepen our faith. I can still remember that. I remember some of our resentments, but I remember some joyful times too. Martha is kind of a type A personality. She found that serving others, organizing her life so that she could serve others, that enriched her faith. Serving enriched her faith. That is, until she began to compare herself to her sister. Mary, on the other hand, was more of what we might call a type B personality. In Hawaii, we call them hang loose. Hang loose kind of personality. She found it joyful to be able to sit at Jesus' feet quietly. That enriched her spiritual heart. Last year, I reached out to several of my friends and I asked them a question. And if they could send their answers back to me. The question was, how do you hear God speaking to you? How do you hear God speaking to you? They sent a lot of answers back to me, and I learned a lot. And I hope you will too, as I share a few things with you of what they said to me. Maybe you've heard God speak to you in some of these ways, or perhaps you may want to try some of these ways if you haven't before. One friend of mine wrote, "I look forward to each Sunday when I can come expecting something from God through the sermon, through discussions with dear friends." What I appreciate from his comment is that he comes expectantly on a Sunday morning. He comes expectantly to hear God. So the question for us is, do we come expectantly to Sunday morning worship to hear God? Do we also expect to hear perhaps God's voice from one of our friends who might be with us? I think we miss a lot when we're not expecting and we're not prepared. And it's important that we do. Many of my friends responded with some of the times in which they heard God through silence. And as one person put it, she wrote, "In the silence, God speaks through feelings that come from deep within me of gratitude for people, for God, and for the recovery of my woundedness." I love that. I love that part. Silence isn't something that's easy for me. Stillness in total is not really easy for me. But it is so true that when we make the time for silence before God, one of the things that happens is gratitude rises from our spirit, doesn't it? Gratitude to God and gratitude for others and what they mean to us in our life. Gratitude just rises to the surface. And oftentimes it's in the silence that God speaks to our hurts and our pains. I can remember in February of last year, the entire month I was at Queen's Hospital. There was so much going on with me at that time besides the first chemotherapy, but lots of things. I was very sick, and I didn't even realize how sick I was. But I remember there are many moments of quietness. I really look forward to the quietness because nurses and other hospital staff, they'd be in my room all the time, And they were always looking for something from me, like my blood, But then when there were moments of quiet, and I was able to just sit in the silence, I would think about all the people in my life that mattered to me. And it really helped to raise up in my spirit a gratitude for my life. And it gave me hope, actually, that going on with the chemotherapy would be a good thing, no matter how long it gave me, because I still had life to live. Also, people spoke about the usual ways that we expect to hear God, like reading the Bible, listening to a sermon, praying, fellowshipping, journaling, music, whether it's church music or non-church music, and even meaningful scenes from movies that spoke to people. And here's one final example. Folks expressed to me how God speaks through dreams and visions. Does God speak to you through visions and dreams? If you've never thought about it, next time you have a vivid dream, as soon as you can, write it down. Especially when you're going through something or you're thinking through something, God actually does speak to us through dreams and visions. So it's important, if you can remember it, to write it down. Just before I became a chaplain at Kuakini, I had this dream that is so vivid that I can remember it to this day. I was on an island, some sort of island, and I was standing in a shack above this valley looking out the window. And I could see down in the valley a small village and people kind of scurrying about in this village. And to my left, as I looked out the window, I could see a huge boulder. And I could see that the boulder was shaking and it was ready to be loosened, to be bolted out of its moorings and head down into the valley. And it did. The boulder started rolling into this valley, and I started yelling from the top in the top of my lungs to the people below, "Get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way." But of course I was too far. Nobody could hear me. And then I woke up. And I woke up kind of in a minor sweat, but I was sad. I was really sad because I realized that I couldn't help those people. I was too far away. And I wrote this down. And what I learned from that dream was that if I was going to be a chaplain, the only way that I could be of help and of use to people is to be with them, to be present with them, to be with them physically, and not to be standing so far away. That was the vision and the dream that God spoke to me. And I pray that perhaps you will experience, we don't have to experience the same things to hear God or to see God. No, that's not the point. But the point is to be open to other ways of seeing and hearing God. And I bet your pastors would love to hear from you if you can share with them ways in which God speaks to you. Let me close with this verse from Proverbs chapter 8, verse 34. It says, "Happy are you who listen to me and keep watch at my door for me, waiting at my gates." Enrich your spiritual hearts, my friends, by leaning into new ways of being present to God. And may you find joy in opening God's door to God's light and God's love, that you might be able to find healing for your hurts and your resentments, and that you can find new ways of encountering the presence of God. And all of this together to allow you to be joyful and to be joyful for others as well. Amen.